President Trump holding an important meeting at Camp David today with his national security team, covering issues like the strategy in Afghanistan and the threat of a nuclear North Korea. So how will the exit of Steve Bannon affect White House foreign policy? This question looms large, given the now former strategist advocated policy prescriptions that clashed with many of the military advisors surrounding the president. Here now, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Waltz is a former Green Beret commander and Fox News contributor. Olivier Knox is chief Washington correspondent for Yahoo News. Colonel, I'll start with you first and ask the big question. So how does Bannon's exit affect the foreign policy of this White House?
Well, you know, how it affected Afghanistan in particular is as reported, Bannon was opposed to continue engagement there and really thought we should just pull our soldiers out. It was too hard. We had been there too long. It was too frustrating, and it cost too much. And he has a point to the extent that it has been difficult, and Al-Qaeda chose one of the most difficult places in the world to make it stand. But I don't see how we can criticize President Obama for completely pulling our troops out of Iraq, ignoring Syria, allowing the Islamic State to flourish, and then launching attacks all over Europe like we just saw in Barcelona, and inspiring attacks in the United States, and not think the same thing is going to happen in Afghanistan, where right next to Pakistan, where you have 10 times the population and nuclear weapons. So I'm very concerned that kind of trend may still continue, even with Bannon gone, that has been implanted in the president's head that it's too hard and too costly. But what will happen is you will have an Islamic State rise in Afghanistan in the wake of the Taliban, and we will be worse off than we were after 9/11. So I think the jury is still out, unfortunately, on whether we need to remain engaged.
Meanwhile, Olivier, we are left wondering how different this foreign policy will look with Bannon's absence.
Right, he was the most forceful, the most passionate, and possibly powerful voice of skepticism for sort of doing things the way they have been done in the country's largest war over nearly 16 years. It's not completely clear. We may find out when the president finally does roll out this long-delayed Afghanistan strategy, you know, this revamp of the war effort. It's not clear at all to me. But Steve Bannon was definitely skeptical, and for a couple of reasons. One is that while there's a general consensus that the main goal in Afghanistan is to prevent that country from once again becoming a platform for attacks on America and its allies, there's no obvious end point. And so he was very skeptical of plunging a president who spent a lot of time on the stump denouncing what he called nation-building efforts, plunging that presidency into yet another, what might look like yet another nation-building effort.
Colonel, speaking of a major announcement and waiting on such, the press secretary's statement did hint that an announcement is coming. There's no date on when that announcement will be or what it will pertain to, but we have this excerpt coming out of the White House. The president is studying and considering his options and will make an announcement to the American people, to our allies and partners, and to the world at an appropriate time concerning protecting America's interest in South Asia. How fast do you expect this to move forward? What's the timeline for an announcement like that, obviously with a new strategy potentially in place with the absence of the chief strategist, Steve Bannon?
Well, I think time is of the essence. We are, and the Afghans are sadly slowly losing in Afghanistan. The Taliban are making gains. ISIS is making gains. We're actually seeing fighters migrating from Raqqa in Syria and Iraq back over to Pakistan and Afghanistan, where they see an opportunity to reestablish the caliphate. So time is of the essence, but I do welcome that announcement. I think it needs to be clear, unlike it was with President Obama, who announced a surge but then pulled the rug out from under it in the same speech by announcing its withdrawal. It needs to be clear that the United States is standing with our Afghan allies, that it's in our national interest. And though, to the point of there being no end date, look, I think we are in a global war against Islamic extremism, and that is going to take, since we're fighting an idea, that is going to take generations. The question here is, do we want to fight that war in Kandahar and Kabul and Raqqa, or do we want to fight it in Kansas City and L.A. and New York?
Fair point.
And I mean, the stakes are high.
In the wake of everything that we have seen this week, the American people just are very concerned right now. And I'll Olivier, leave this off with you.
The Trump coming out from the president.
The tweet coming from President Trump today, heading to Camp David for major meeting on national security, the border, and the military, which we are rapidly building to strongest ever. Something you could say to people watching, fearing what we saw happen in Europe this week. People are fearful.
Of course, and they've been fearful to a greater or lesser extent since September 12th of 2001, the day after the 9/11 attacks. You know, one of the biggest challenges, of course, is that, and you hear this a lot from law enforcement, intelligence, and military people, is that U.S. government officials and military officials have to be right 100% of the time, and the terrorists just have to be right 1% of the time. It's an enormous challenge. There are ebbs and flows in American attitudes. There's the most interesting thing I saw, I think, the other day was the acting Homeland Security Secretary who said that the administration would not let terrorism become the new normal. I think if you talk to a lot of Americans, they might tell you that it's already the new normal.
Yeah, unfortunately. Thanks to both of you for being here tonight. Good to see you.